Hey, welcome to HoopSpeak Live. I'm Beckley Mason with Zach Harper, Ethan Sherwood-Strauss, and a whole mess of good topics to talk about today.
Woo!
And very excited about our guests, our own HoopSpeak Live Big Three, Kevin Arnovitz from ESPN.com, S.I. Lee Jenkins from Sports Illustrated. You can also just call him Lee Jenkins if you don't like to refer to people only by their Twitter handle.
I actually only call him SI.
The man with the P-Flan, Paul Flannery. So we have a really great show. Sign in, ask questions. We're going to have audience questions in about 10 minutes. But first, gentlemen, let's begin with really one of the great performances of the playoffs this year. Rajon Rondo, 53 minutes. 44 points, 10 assists, 8 rebounds, a few really awesome glares at the officials. What did you make of his performance?
I think you put it with the exact right touch there, Beckley. One of the great performances of the playoffs. I think something that we were discussing, well, we'll get on to that first. I do first want to acknowledge that there was something awesome about watching Rondo continuously hit a shot that in theory he cannot hit. And though we don't believe in the hot hand theory, he seemingly did catch fire and maintain great stamina through those 53 minutes. But I think people were going a little bit overboard, and I think Richard Deitch of Sports Illustrated and some others were saying it was the greatest playoff performance in the loss they'd ever seen. I respectfully disagree with that. I mean, I've seen LeBron James do better in quite a few playoff losses than that, and I think it's kind of funny that if LeBron James perhaps had that exact same game in defeat, he'd probably just be criticized, and we wouldn't be talking about it as one for the ages, one of the all-time great games. So I think expectations have a lot to do with how we remember what Rondo did and how we celebrate it.
What's weird about the whole game is that it was just a basic strategy of he shot when he was open, and I know you guys are going to get into that, but it just reaffirmed what I wrote about this early last season. Why play off of him? It makes no sense. Like, you give him the whole vision. We've talked about it on here. You give him an entire viewpoint of the floor, and now if he's going to hit the jumper, I mean, it makes even less sense if he's taking and making that jumper. I get you think, oh, the first three, maybe that was a fluke. All right, the fourth one's a fluke. By the fourth one, you have to think, all right, maybe he's on today, and maybe we need to change our game plan, because it put Miami in a hole defensively almost the entire night.
Yeah, and what I really also liked is that he hit that shot late in the game. Like, a lot of times Rondo will come out and he'll shoot that open jumper in the first couple quarters. And then as the game winds down, he's basically only trying to get in that weird spot where he stands 19 feet from the hoop with no one within like 8 feet from him, and just waits to pick out people. This is my pick out move, by the way. Running around on screens on the baseline. That's how I pass when I play basketball. Get it away! But he kept taking those shots at the end of the game. And that was really awesome. And, you hope that he keeps doing it. But it is hilarious that, like, we're celebrating this incredible performance that, 18 of those points basically came on entirely uncontested 16-footers for a point guard.
Yeah.
Which just cracks me up, because, yes, it was a great performance. Yes, he made those shots. Like, even if he was a decent shooter and he shot regularly, still making those shots is like when Steve Nash went for 48 against Dallas. Like, they just left him and he just buried those shots. That was a great performance. That was like this, to me, it wasn't. So it has this weird thing where, like, our own expectations inflate his performance rather than what the competition was doing against him.
Yeah, and I to be honest, I've seen better Rondo games. I think it's funny that this is becoming the Rondo game when it's not necessarily Rondo doing that which defines him. It wasn't one of his better just carving up the defense and passing games, and not one of his, I would even say fantastic rebounding performances. He did what he needed to do. You cannot find much fault with how he played over the span of 53 minutes. but it's just not necessarily the kind of performance that you'd expect from him. What's interesting to me is its relationship to 53 minutes, because it's the performance is talked about, and 53 minutes is supposed to kind of add to it, but it also makes the stat line kind of less crazy, that he is essentially playing 2 extra starters minutes per quarter, like 2 extra quarters more than he usually does. I mean, LeBron's numbers prorated out for 53 minutes. I mean, like in the Cleveland days, I think would be, got it right here, 40, nearly 12, and 10, like every game. So I just like, how do you feel about the 53 minutes now that plays in? I'm rambling, Zach. You cut.
I actually think that it makes it more impressive, because there's supposed to be a sense of fatigue. There's supposed to be a sense of wearing down. If the only blow you're getting is during a timeout or during the quarter break, and you're just coming out there and playing relentlessly, it doesn't matter what defensive player they throw at you, you're still playing at that high level. I mean, you can say the scoring was a bit inflated, not even because of the open jumpers, but because of the 2 long jumpers at the end that really weren't contested, and it was just kind of, let's get this game over with, don't foul. So maybe, all right, it wasn't a true 40-point game if you even want to argue that. But everything else, the fact that he played the entire game, didn't take a single rest that wasn't mandated by some ad selling, that makes it even more impressive to me.
Yeah, I think that one thing I really enjoyed watching Rondo do was manage. I mean, like, it looked like at halftime, Doc was like, "Okay, you're playing the whole game, buddy. We are trying to limit Keon Dooling's time because he is cracked out on 5-hour energy." Like, can we sidebar, 3 5-hour energies before the game? Are you freaking kidding me? This was so funny to me. First off, that stuff is straight poison. Second, 3 would make you bounce off.
Unless they're
I have a
responsive.
half one, and I'm like wired. And then he just plays like an abjectly terrible game. Awful, like hyper fouls all over the court. When he fouled, when he got into it with Haslem, like briefly, and then walked away going, I was like, he might be gonna blow a blood vessel.
It looked like he was on PCP. It looked like he was like strung out on PCP after that foul. He fouls him, kind of gets in his face, and then just walks away, just like and like clapping his hands. I was like, what is wrong with you?
He was on bath salts. He was playing on bath salts.
I love how 5-hour energy, essentially their slogan is all about how coffee is too difficult to make, and that it also comes in essentially a neon bottle. Like, who's this person that goes like, "Oh my god, coffee, It's like, it's not churning butter. I don't understand.
Like, hey, ever wonder how close you can get to having your heart explode? Have a 5-hour energy drink.
I also
take 3 before you sprint around for an hour and a half.
The person's always alone.
All right, so back to Rondo.
Advertisements. Yes, Rondo. Well, okay. I just wonder.
Rondo.
Brought up earlier. If LeBron has the exact same game, how is it judged? How do people talk about it?
I don't think it matters.
Well, and they lost,
because
and
they're different players.
But he scored. Yeah, he scored, and also he scored 12 points in the overtime, which was pretty impressive. But what I was gonna say is Rondo in the third quarter was coasting for like a while. I mean, he decided, like, I'm gonna be on the court, I'm gonna make decisions and try to feed people and keep us close, but like I can't keep pushing at this level. And he did a really masterful job to me of managing his own pace in the middle of the game. Yeah, like Chris Paul, like a lot of great players will do. And so, yes, it inflated it, but it was also, it wasn't like he was, I mean, who could go that hard for 53 minutes, but he managed to help his team even when he was, kind of drawing on reserves.
And I think something to mention here is Mario Chalmers, one, didn't defend him well because he played really poorly, but he made up for it on the offensive end. Chalmers was awesome, and he moved Rondo around defensively in ways you wouldn't expect by moving away from the ball, flying into corners, coming across screens. I mean, I think Chalmers kind of counteract, as much as you can counteract a 44-point game by the opposing point guard. I thought he did a really good job of making Rondo be honest on defense and make him work to maybe even make the end of the game a lot more taxing for Rondo, considering he played the entire 53. And that also makes it more impressive to me that he could still muster up those late in the game points.
All right, I'm putting something in the chat right now. I actually, right before we started, something went up on True Hoop that I wrote about Chalmers and the Heat role players, and I'll just summarize it so that no one has to read unnecessarily, although I will say it's only 400 words. You know, you'll cruise through it in a minute and a half. But the point is that what struck me is like all the role players for the Heat were doing this. They were being very aggressive about how they pursued their role, especially Chalmers, who would attack the weak side off the dribble when they doubled Wade, how they switched up their pick and roll coverage. There's a little technical stuff in there. But remember at the beginning and midway through the season, and even at the end, when LeBron and Wade would give up the ball at the end of the game, and this was obviously particularly criticized when Wade would do it, LeBron, and people are like, why aren't they taking those shots? They need to get those big-time shot reps. And they let them, they let these other dudes have it. And now, when Bosch is out and they have to turn to guys like Battier and they have to turn to guys like Haslam and Chalmers, those dudes are stepping up in a serious way. They got 44 points from them last night. And I have to believe that it's because they formed this relationship, this interdependence, earlier in the year when the stakes weren't quite as high.
I think that I've been so impressed by the way Shane Battier has played. Like, one, he's played out of position a lot.
Yeah, I left him David for West. Dead.
Yeah, and it didn't look like he had much, and I don't even think it was he's pacing himself kind of thing like we saw with a lot of stars on the Spurs or with the Celtics as the season got better or season got longer, they got better. I think he was just playing really poorly, and it looked like he had nothing. And there was a point where he hit that corner three. I don't remember what part of the game it was, but Mike Breen mentioned like he was smiling before the pass came to him, like he's reveling in this idea that I've got a corner three, I'm going to make it. Here, you pass me the ball, Beckley, and I'm waiting for this. I'm waiting for this shot, and it seems like he is just like wanting to take these corner threes and just drill the opposing team throughout the entire playoffs.
Yeah, no,
Danny Nowell wrote about that. I'm putting the link in.
Yeah.
It's on HoopSpeak. You just scroll down. Sorry.
This is not a point of any consequence or any incisiveness, but I just wonder. We had that moment with Popovich compelling Steven Jackson with "I want some nasty." Obviously, Spoelstra probably told Chalmers to attack when they were trapping Wade far from the hoop. What adjective do you think was told to Chalmers to get him going? Was it "I want some impulsive"? I want some delusionally confident. I want some crazy. I want some sketchy. What
I want some
yelled the Chalmers.
He said, "I want some assassinus. I want you to be assassinus right now." That's what he wanted from him. And like the way Wade played the trap in the first half,
rub some stink on it, Chalmers. Rub some stink on it.
Was one of the most embarrassing things I've ever seen from a star, and I'm not trying to be hyperbolic there, but he could not have played a trap worse. Like, it was the first time he ever saw it. They trapped him on the side, and he's trying to make cross-court passes that he can't make, and part of that is Mike Miller would usually be at the top, and you want him to flash to the free throw line so he's got an easier pass to make. But, I mean, I think Wade was trying to pass like LeBron, not like I think I can pass as good as LeBron, but he's trying to make the plays that he sees LeBron makes. And there are very few guys that can make that cross-court pass like that, especially against a defense like Boston, and Wade's certainly not one of them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And I was just wondering if we could talk about LeBron a little bit, because there was... I feel like two things happened. I feel like there was one thing where people were unfair to him, and then there was another instance following it where I think a lot of our ilk reflexively defends LeBron against some of the irrational outrage out there. But at the same time, I do think that he was playing at the beginning of overtime in this odd way where he was just giving up the ball instantly and not seemingly playing smart. There was a possession that ended in a Haslam-made shot, actually, but that was more by coincidence. LeBron had great position and an opportunity to score, and he just shoveled the ball away. And I was wondering if you guys noticed that and how you felt about it. The one that I think people were being unfair to him was the shot at the end of regulation, people do this thing where you always should have shot an easier shot. You know, like you should have gone to the post or you should have driven. You want the last shot as the buzzer, as it goes into the buzzer in a tie game. He had Rondo guarding him. Rondo is much shorter, so it's just a clean look at the buzzer. If he drives, he can pick up a foul potentially and send the Celtics to the line. I think that was a fine decision. He just missed. So I was wondering how you guys felt about both of those things.
I thought that it was funny how it's almost treating him like a kid that we're proud of. It's like, well, he wanted the ball there. He wanted the ball. He went and asked for the ball. So that's good for you, LeBron. Now you've got to take a better shot than that. I looked up this shot chart for the season. He was like 42% from that spot on the floor, that just inside the 3-point line on the wing there. It's an okay shot. I do think this is where criticism of LeBron is needed. It was an okay shot. There was no way it was getting truly contested. You have 65 pounds on Rondo. Get to the free throw line, not like get fouled, but get to the free throw line and pull up for that jumper. Don't pull up from 22 feet away. Like, that's not the best shot you can get, especially against Rondo. I mean, maybe you're worried he's going to strip you or something, but you can get to the free throw line. There was no help there.
Yeah, Rondo is really good at jamming up taller players and like getting his long arms and quick hands in there. I agree with you, Zach. Like, I have no problem with if they get like a really bad mismatch like that and they let LeBron work one-on-one. I would like to see him get to do it from an angle. I just like, I think from the top it's sort of a weird. There's not a lot you can do besides go one-on-one. But like Zach, I think that if he had gone 2 hard dribbles and pulled and gone straight up and shot it, with a little bit more balance, it would have looked better. The fact that he was fading away from Rondo, I thought was maybe unnecessary. But Ethan's point is well taken in that it was not you wouldn't call that a bad look. Like, it's not the best look
shooting
you could
that
get,
shot.
But it's one of his shots. I was actually surprised he went right, and when he started going right, I thought he was going to drive because typically,
same here.
If he can get a dribble with his right, he's trying to get to the basket. If he can go to his left, he's more likely to, and he always shoots better going left. But it wasn't a good shot. It's the same kind of shot we would criticize Durant or Kobe for, but it wasn't a terrible decision to shoot a relatively unguarded 19-footer.
Yeah, I'm still wondering what you guys think about that stanza, not a stanza, but that little, the beginning of overtime where he did seem to be playing differently than he usually does and a little bit Dallas-y. And it's funny because this is not the kind of criticism that I usually make. It's the kind of criticism that people I criticize usually make. But I think that sometimes you have to acknowledge that this does exist, that it doesn't define him, that it's not necessarily predictive, but it happens occasionally. It doesn't make him a bad player or a loser, but he does have these moments where he gets a little bit frazzled and just coughs the ball up. And I was wondering if you guys saw that too, or if I'm imagining it.
Yeah, no, I think I saw a little bit of that where I don't know that he is quitting. I don't know that he's afraid. I think he just kind of mentally checks out a bit. Like kind of how Beckley was talking about Rondo in the third quarter. He was there, he was present, but he wasn't necessarily trying to make everything happen. And I think that it's a weird time to take that kind of mental break, but he snapped himself out of it. He got a big tip. He had that pass into he caught the pass from Wade, dished it right into Haslam. Like, I don't think that's something an aggressive player does in that situation where he gets involved to get his teammate an easy dunk. I think he kind of snapped himself out of it, but it did look like he kind of pulled back a little bit.
Yeah, I think that it's entirely fair and warranted to say, why weren't you taking over there? It was like he wanted, to give Wade a turn to kind of be the man. But I'm glad you brought up that cut, Zach, because, and this has been written about a couple places very well, I think by Zach Lowe, and that is that LeBron's off-the-ball instincts and activity have gotten much better. And when he's in a slump or
Yes.
when he's not feeling it, and he still makes the hard cut to the middle when he's supposed to, that's a good sign for Heat fans, because it seems to me like that's becoming more natural and instinctive for him. All right. Good talk on last night's game. Someone who knows the Heat about as well as anyone, and is a good friend of HoopSpeak Live. Let's bring on
Just a great friend.
Kevin Arnovitz.
He's Kevin
That's
Arnovitz.
excellent.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one. Usually we do something weird. This is like an honor to get Hubie.
That's decidedly not weird. That my floating end is 6 inches to the right of young Hubie Brown. No, there's nothing weird about that.
How you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Good. Are you seeing what you expected to see in the Western Conference from the San Antonio and Thunder matchup?
No, I thought Oklahoma City would leverage their athleticism in a way that you can against a team whose front line is nailed to the floor. And for whatever reason,
Right.
I think it's just taking them longer to do that. I think they're going to get it. Like, I don't... This series isn't over. I don't expect Oklahoma City to win 4 out of 5, but I do think they figured a few things out toward the end of Game 2 that went far beyond just hacking Thiago's splitter. But no, I've been a
What
little
are those?
disappointed. I think that you have to create a more mobile defense against San Antonio. Look, the truth of the matter is Perkins is their best screener. Well, and that's great. He is their best post defender. That's great. Well, you know what? The Spurs don't run their offense through Tim Duncan in the post. Oh, well, he's a great screener. Well, guess what? Their big men never leave the paint anyway. So who are you jamming up? And it's just like, and by the way, I think this has gotten into this sort of demonization of Kendrick Perkins. Of what's he doing out there on the floor? Like, Perkins is a wonderful player. Ask any Eastern Conference contender in the last 5 years. But he's just, I think, ill-suited. And this is a riddle that I think every team, every presidential ticket, anybody who ever seats, a wedding party has to think of, like, how do we want to assemble the pieces on the board? Do we want skills that complement each other? Do we want to double down on our strengths? Oh, we have a lot of shooters. Well, now we need an inside presence. Do you want to balance, or do you want to double down? And I think Brooks is still trying to figure out what personnel gives him the best chance to at least slow San Antonio to any degree.
One thing that we had talked about before the series was this lineup, which would be Westbrook, Harden, Cephalosha, Durant, Ibaka. That is probably the fastest 5-person lineup in the NBA. If there's any 5 that can sprint around the court, that can switch as many things as possible, and try to slow up and gum up the San Antonio offense, that might be it. The downside is that lineup wants to play fast, and you know who else loves playing fast is San Antonio. That seems to be the risk. Is that valid?
Yeah, there are 2 themes in the entire postseason that go beyond this series, that go back to the Atlanta-Boston series and various others. I think this is going to go down as, and maybe Mike Woodson was ahead of us all, but this is the year of the switch, right? Like, just throw your most athletic dudes on the floor, all between 6'5" and 6'9", and just have a party, right? And I think, and I think that's sort of it's one of the big things that's happening, and we saw it last night. I mean, we saw it last night in Miami,
Right.
Boston. The least Hawksian series you could imagine, and you've got Shane Battier taking on David West, and it's just give me basketball players. Yeah, I am. To those who don't know, I represent Thabo Cephalosha. Various public appearances, and because I am his biggest fan. But and I'm not a guy who normally. I've never been a fan of the Monday morning quarterback critique. Well, why wasn't that guy on the floor? But I just kind of had this moment of indignation after Game 2, where it's like, precisely what is Derek Fisher giving you here? And I know Fisher's an easy target, and if you didn't grow up liking the Lakers, or you just think he's old, or you don't like people in their 30s or whatever, but. To your point, Cephalosha seemed like such an essential...
Aegis!
Yes, exactly. he just seemed like such an essential piece. He's their best perimeter defender.
Mm-hmm.
He shoots 43.7% from three. You know, you can space the floor with him a little bit. Yeah, he's never been there before, for whatever that's worth.
Right.
But I'm with you. Like, at this point, I think Oklahoma City can't get into a skills competition. They're going to lose the compulsories to San Antonio. Unfortunately, what it encourages them to do is things like they did late in the third quarter, which I think has ignited your new hoop idea of we got to do something about these intentional fouls.
Yeah, that was, it was really funny because, Pop's reaction to that specific thing was we think it's unsportsmanlike, we think it's dirty, but, it's a good move. And I felt like Duncan Duncan basically said we were in kind of like another world, like an otherworldly groove. Like we were just on another plane of basketball existence, and that brought us back down. To me, I don't know if, it didn't really get them any closer. I guess they were 1 point further away than when they started hacking. But it did seem to just gum up the complexion of the game. And I wonder if there's any way to do that without, resorting to these kind of gimmicks. Like, is there a way to do that to San Antonio without actually just fouling intentionally? Like, can someone Memphis them this year, or are they just beyond that?
I think, the only way, and easier said than done, is, you could just keep them out of the middle of the floor, for crying out loud. But, yeah, it's easier said than done. But, no, both series are really interesting, for so many different reasons. I just feel like, I don't know if it's the shortened season, I don't know if it's the nature of, older teams trying to overcome their age, younger teams trying to leverage their athleticism, but it's just, I just feel like there's more guerrilla warfare. There's just more fire drills going on in this postseason than we've ever seen before. I feel like in the Memphis Clippers series, and granted I was at 7 games in that series, I saw a lot of it there. The Hawks, just the Philadelphia defense. It's just over and over, we're just seeing more, hey, let's just bring out the kitchen sink. And orthodoxy is kind of going out the window. Shane Battier is a power forward.
Well, that's one of the things that's so great about the playoffs is that in the regular season, you're playing the long game. You're playing the averages. In the playoffs, you're still thinking statistically, still thinking how can I limit opportunities, but you're also thinking very hyper specifically about one matchup, which makes covering it and thinking about it and arguing about it so much fun.
Right. Now it's just like, okay, how do we combat Indiana's height? Or, how can we, leverage our speed against this one slow dude? And,
yeah.
How can we capitalize on, a pick and roll coverage that's influencing us this way or that way? And it's why 7-game series are so awesome, and why I think a 7 games NBA series is still the greatest event in sports.
Hey, Kevin. Speaking of pick and roll, I'm fascinated with how OKC is defending Tony Parker, at least last game. They're sending Russell under the screen, and that's not anything new, but it really seems like it's not the same as what Rondo did last night because they were just playing off of him and not respecting his jumper, but it's almost like when you give Tony Parker that kind of space, it's basically a wide open shot for him. How do you agree with how they're defending it? Can you defend it another way? Can you just completely trap him instantly and hope that the ball movement isn't there?
They trail a lot, Oklahoma City, and I think, with Perkins, that's an obvious problem because now you have nobody stepping into that space, and which is why I think Ibaka is, the funny thing is Ibaka is one of these funny things because I think he's overrated defensively because the blocks numbers, but at the same time he can fill that space, particularly if they try to switch things up, which they did late in the game. But yeah, they've always been vulnerable because they do a lot of trailing, and I think there's a certain nod to, hey, we're fast, we'll catch up. But I liked what they did in the third and fourth quarter, and the truth is, and Henry wrote about this on Troop the morning after. You want to give Tony Parker, over a dozen jump shots. I mean, that's fine. I think all 2-point shots are not created equal, and they've got to get in that space. But they did a much better job of contesting down the stretch. I mean, basically, who has won the last 14 to 16 minutes of that series? Oklahoma City right now, I think, you've started to catch up.
How do they turn that around? I mean, Russell Westbrook got a lot of crap, and some of it's justified. Maybe most of it isn't. I think it's just finding a scapegoat. But the defense was the problem, and once they mucked it up with the hack-a-splitter, it kind of allowed them to reset and reevaluate and basically hit pause on the game to try to figure out what they were going to do without using a timeout. Is there anything they can do as far as negating the movement away from the ball? I mean, is it simply a matter of you check a guy when he comes through the lane, you bump a guy when he's trying to run off a screen? I mean, how do you counteract what San Antonio? Well, I guess if you knew, maybe you'd be a head coach in the NBA.
I think part of the problem is and here's the thing that drives me crazy about Oklahoma City, in their defense. They were working hard. I mean, Westbrook got an absolute crazy workout. But there were moments when you're watching. Granted, when you're on the floor, it's an entirely different game. But there were moments where you're sort of watching. Here comes San Antonio with the step-up screen. Oh, what a surprise! And it's almost it isn't the Iverson. Oh, what happened here? But there were moments when, hey guys, you didn't just see this exact same sequence 45 seconds ago. I just think kind of the art of anticipation in a way that slower defenses that still succeed, like Boston. I mean, Boston is so ridiculously slow, but they kind of know what you're going to run before you run it, and it buys time for guys like Bass, for guys like Ray Allen who are really, really slow. And I just don't think Oklahoma City has any. I'm not going to say they're not prepared. I mean, they're working really hard, but it's just like you didn't know that landmine was right there. Hey, by the way, this is exactly the moment where Duncan steps off the left block, sets a cross screen for Tony as he curls underneath the basket. They've been running this stuff for the better part of 12 years. Might just want to get it in your iPad.
With the way with the way they've defended Durant, with the Spurs have defended Durant, I've been really impressed because I think Kawhi does a good job, and then you bring Steven Jackson's insanity into it, and it's enjoyable to watch just because there's really no reason Steven Jackson should be able to defend Kevin Durant, and you can say he's not fighting for position or he's not trying to get open, but it's an insanity that not a lot of players bring. It's almost like a Reggie Evans effect with the Clippers, where he's just going to come in and be more physical than everybody, and it's almost like a challenge of manhood in a way. And do you need that against Durant more than you need just a technically sound defender like maybe Kawhi is, or even Danny Green to an extent?
I just love what they're doing. I love when you play a guy's right shoulder at 35 feet. And what's so amazing, because when I'll be perfectly honest, when I first saw it, I was like, oh, that's just not gonna fly. They're gonna beat him, and then it's 5-on-4, a fast 5 versus a slow 4. I mean, because who's back there now? Boris Diaw, Tim Duncan, Danny Green's a pretty quick guy, Gary Neal, and I was like, this is gonna be 5-on-4, and this is why I think, what I want to see tonight, and it is gonna make for completely unattractive basketball. I mean, I'm Scott Brooks. I just tell Kevin Durant, I wanted 20 free throws. You see what LeBron did last night? He was 7 for 20. Couldn't really get into the flow of the game. Just, there you go. 20 free throws. He's going to play up on you like that from that kind of distance along the sideline. Just drop and go. And, and if they don't call it, they don't call it. But if I'm Durant, I'm looking for 20 free throws tonight.
No, I wanted to say I'm glad you brought up the right shoulder, the sitting on the right shoulder thing, because Timothy Varner was talking about that with me in private, and with this sort of, I don't know why he's doing that. I know they're doing that. I don't know why Pop's doing that, though. So I'm glad you could parse it. Related to that, as a man who is very good at sussing out strategy and has an appreciation for the strategic elements of basketball, what's your favorite playoff adjustment since you've been watching the playoffs? I mean, for me, it's when Larry Brown single covered Shaquille O'Neal against the Detroit Pistons and completely gummed up the Lakers offense. I'm wondering if you have any good examples that you could draw from and share with us right now.
I remember when Rick Carlisle went to can you guys hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Good. Okay. I wasn't hearing myself, so that was my concern. Remember when Rick Carlisle went to Austin Crozier when the Pacers were on their roll? Yeah. It was it was a really, really interesting adjustment. Basically, Carlisle benched Foster and desperately needed spacing because, you know, they were just being packed in. The Pacers could not get any space. It was one of those really ugly series against Detroit being played in the 70s. It was about 2-all, and they just go to Crozier, who'd not played at all, kind of spread the floor. And this is before, I mean, it seems natural now, but this was before the days of the stretch big. I mean, there just weren't a lot of big guys on the floor who could shoot the ball. Or if they could shoot the ball, it certainly wasn't a cornerstone of any specific strategy. And it was one of my favorite playoff adjustments. And the kind of first time I kind of noticed Carlisle as a resourceful dude.
I'm wondering, you seem to really enjoy, like so many people, but you've been enjoying it for longer, the Spurs way of playing this year. And I'm wondering, do you think that it's an aesthetic improvement over the Phoenix Suns teams that were so loved? How would you judge those two if you have to rank them?
What, the Spurs championships teams versus this sort of glass-nosed Spurs?
No, I mean the Suns, 7 seconds or less versus, yeah.
This is more orderly. It still relies on reads the way that Phoenix offense relies on reads, but I do think, you know, those are like spokes on a wheel. Whereas, I'm trying to think of the app metaphor now, that those are like spokes on a wheel. What is this? I mean, this is like a turbine engine or something. I mean, I don't think there's any chaos to this. I don't think there is any sense that we're gonna muck up the game. I mean, Phoenix, for as beautiful as it was guerrilla warfare. It was we're gonna fill this vacuum that we create by demolishing kind of the pillars that usually govern basketball games: position, clock, and the Spurs are still very much playing within the confines. I think in a very tight context, but they're just moving so well. And it's amazing that a guy never deliberates. It was a great moment where Steve Kerr kind of scolded Russell Westbrook, and I'm not advocating the scolding of Russell Westbrook or the scapegoating of Russell Westbrook, but he was just like, hey man, almost on cue, just move the ball. You don't have anything. You know, and if you don't have anything within 3 seconds, just move the ball. And it's kind of basic 8th grade, you know, kind of basketball counseling. And then you kind of watch San Antonio, it's like a guy never, the minute he calculates, and it takes about a second and a half for a San Antonio Spur to realize, I'm not the option on this possession. Next. And they just cycle through like 8, 9, 10, 11 touches in a 24-second possession, and it just basically gives you 8, 9, 10, 11, you know, decisions to make. I mean, it's just a larger menu of options when the ball lands in the hands of that many guys, you know, with that many opportunities.
I'm very ambivalent about this style of play. I sometimes take immense joy in watching it, and other times I wonder, in the sort of mechanical metaphor we're using, if it's a little too much like cog ball, and it almost seems to not rely on transcendent talent so much as organization. And I wonder, do you think that this is an objective aesthetic improvement over what we saw in the 90s, where we essentially had hero ball and the conditions to make hero ball perhaps more effective? Do you think that we can objectively say this is better? And am I right to be concerned that it's a little too collectivist, a little too a little too European, perhaps.
What?
Is that a legitimate concern?
The Austrian school of basketball with Ethan Sherwood-Strauss. No, it's far too collectivist. Hey, look, it's a matter of taste. Sometimes it's fun to watch offense that's based on shot selection, or shot creation, rather. I mean, that's what Oklahoma City does, right? Like, they rely on shot creation as a means to score the basketball. There is no... You don't rely on shot creation within the San Antonio system. It's about space and timing. And it's rarely going to devolve into one-on-one situation off the dribble with 5 seconds left on the clock. I think there's room... Listen, I would loathe a league where 80% of the teams subscribe to 5% of the blueprints, right? I mean, this is great. It's great that San Antonio does it this way, and it's great that Oklahoma City does it the other way, and it's great that Miami does it the way you do, and it's great that, you know, Boston, while not a very attractive offensive team, still has some really good fundamental stuff they go to. And I don't want the Final Four teams in the NBA playing all the same way.
Very, very good point. If San Antonio, you know, keeps going and so does Miami, it's going to be a really, really interesting clash of styles, and it's a similar clash as what I guess Miami ran up against in Dallas, although Dallas was more predicated on isolations for Dirk Nowitzki and passing and moving out of those. Is a similar whip it around the perimeter to an open three-point shooter game plan. Thanks a lot for coming on, man. This was fun.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So you can follow Kevin if you don't already, because you're an idiot, at Arnovitz Kevin on Twitter. And let's bring on our next guest. Let's hop right to it. He is coming to us, if I understand this, from the Business Center in a Oklahoma City hotel. He's becoming a frequent guest. We have a great time with him every single time. Ladies and gentlemen, Lee Jenkins.
Hey guys, how are you?
Good. How's it going, Lee?
Good. I audibled from the Business Center because there were all these softball players running around. I didn't know if you guys wanted that on the show or not. They have the College World Series here, so you can't get a hotel room.
The weirder, the better. You know how we like to do it. Well, let's jump right into one of the interesting, kind of the hot point topics of this series, which is Russell Westbrook's play. He's working his butt off on defense, giving a great effort, and giving, he's certainly not for lack of effort on offense. But how would you evaluate the way he's played in the first two games?
I'd say better in game 2 than game 1. He is having to work his butt off, as you guys have said. I think the problem for him is still kind of getting lured into these, one-on-one matchups like with Tony Parker. And look, it's a common refrain, but just this feeling that for them to advance or to win some games here, it has to be more Durant's show than his. I'd give him a pretty strong grade on game 2, not as good on game 1. There were just too many of those, Russell Westbrook pull-up jumpers that I know destroyed Ramon Sessions, but obviously aren't going to be as effective against Parker.
Right, and I guess at some point you have to wonder, though, this is who Russell Westbrook has been as a player for the last few years. There hasn't been a ton of development there. Is it fair to put this on Westbrook now that he's running up against something that, what he's been allowed to do and been encouraged to do for the last 3 years isn't working as well?
Right, that's a good point. I mean, this is sort of who he is, and he's become really good at it. I mean, those pull-up jumpers go in now a lot more than they used to. So, I think his development's been pretty steady. It's just that, you're seeing a team with probably better players being beaten by a better team of maybe inferior players, and that's often going to fall on the point guard because he's not necessarily making those other pieces better. But look, this is always the debate with Russell Westbrook with so many other guys in the league. It's like, do you kind of appreciate him for who he is, or do you sort of wish he's going to be something different? And I think with Oklahoma City and the way he was in the first 2 rounds, I think it's hard to call this season anything more than a step up, a step forward for Westbrook. But I'm interested to see what's your guys' take on that?
Well, I guess I can cut in there and perhaps respond. Hi, Lee. How you doing? Number 1. And number 2, to follow up on
Talk
that,
about your accents.
I'm not going to talk about my San Diego accent. About how maybe we can get a California
I went to a
burrito.
voice coach just for this.
Exactly. This is all front. I talk completely differently. Well, here's my theory, and I'll bounce this off you, and I want to see what you think. I think that because of the position Westbrook plays, we have this platonic ideal of what a point guard is supposed to be. And Westbrook is more of a scoring 2 guard, but just because of that emotional attachment, his reckless play is put under more of a magnifying glass, and that accounts for a lot of the criticism. What do you think about that?
No, I think you're right. And it's been reckless going back to UCLA. This has been, and that's what makes it, when Oklahoma City's great, they're on that edge. They're a little bit reckless. And that's why I thought they'd make this, to this point, more of a series, because of, like what Kevin said, being able to channel that athleticism, being able to just, I thought if San Antonio got into a track meet with them, that would really favor Oklahoma City. And this is what, wasn't this a problem with Parker too? Early in his career, didn't people say he was too much of a scoring point guard and didn't fit that role? So I think the question with Westbrook is, how much can he grow going forward and become like a Tony Parker, or is this kind of just who he is? Because I do think that in this series, Durant's been sublimated, and looking at, you look at Westbrook, you look at Parker, and you wonder. It's something that I'm sure drives people in Oklahoma City crazy, just what he could accomplish in a series like this with a true point.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting you bring up Parker. He's right before the season started, I wrote about kind of some things that I thought Westbrook could do, and one of the things we wrote about, and the the Thunder have actually implemented kind of a version of the Spurs motion weak offense where they have Westbrook cut through and cycle out, and they do a couple things like that. Of course, they don't have Tim Duncan on the block. They can't just toss it in and make that a threat.
Right.
But I think that Parker has definitely improved with his vision, and part of that is that he knows exactly where his teammates are going to be when he drives. When he goes down the middle and they collapse on him, he can blindly throw it to the corner, and he knows there's going to be someone there.
Yeah.
I don't feel like Westbrook has that security when he gets closed in, and that's when his he doesn't have Chris Paul like vision. He's got fine vision for a point guard as far as I'm concerned. And then off the ball, you could expect him to be a really big weapon the way that they used Tony Parker, coming off screens, back cuts, flex cuts along the baseline. But that's all coaching, isn't it? Isn't that a lot of that coaching and development and over time molding the player that you want him to be?
I talked to Scott Brooks a little bit about this a couple months ago. That he can't even get guys to stand in the corner. They're all a few years removed from high school. They want to be around the ball all the time. It's still very much of a free-flowing deal, whereas San Antonio, you've got kind of stationed in the corner. And you're right, Parker does know. It seems like such a simple, even though it's not, it looks like such a simple offense that it's probably, for a guy like Parker, easier to execute. It's a tough thing. Is this Oklahoma City's kind of youth and freelance attitude a product of Westbrook, or is it just a product of how young they are as a team and that it's still not maybe fully formed?
It's interesting that you should mention Brooks because, and I don't want to be unkind to the man, but when I've interviewed him, he's the most boring interview I've ever encountered in just all of interviews. And I'm wondering if you've had a similar experience, and I also wonder, when you happen upon somebody who's like that, do you think that this is a great subject for a sweeping profile of mine, or do you think that this is a bad subject of a sweeping, inside look Lee Jenkins profile? So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
I'd rather talk about that. On the strategic stuff, I kind of feel like Kendrick Perkins on the perimeter, a little bit clueless.
Heyo.
But no, I like.
Or on the block, for that matter. I mean, geez.
Anywhere in his house.
I actually did a story with Oklahoma City with the Thunder, and it was done last summer, or 2 summers ago. And Brooks let me run this hill with the team. He took me out there, and I was running around because they run this weird hill in the middle of Oklahoma City to get ready for the season. And Durant was out there and everybody else, so I got to bond a little bit with him. And no, I think I think he actually is a good subject for a sweeping profile. I don't think he's as boring as he maybe lets on in press conferences. So you know what, Ethan? He's got a little bit of our accent too, our dialect.
I should be kinder to him.
Orange County guy.
Maybe that's why I find him boring.
So.
I know him, or at least I feel like I perhaps know him at some level. Who do you think is the best interview subject in this series, if you had to guess, or profile subject?
Jackson?
On either team.
Why are we even talking about this?
Yes, Jack. Yeah, Jackson. Good call. Yeah, good call. He's one of those guys who you'd like to do a night in the life with.
Yeah. From afar, though, you want a plastic shield around you while you're doing that night in the life.
You know what? Yeah, exactly. Profile subject either, because I had this idea of a story about all the kind of crazy. All these teams need one crazy guy. Like Clippers had Reggie Evans, and now Jackson, and Perkins, and Garnett, obviously, and Haslam. You kind of go down the line. It's almost like hockey. They all have one sort of enforcer. So I thought Perkins would be a pretty good idea for that, but it looks like that might fizzle out on me.
Well, I think it's interesting that now, people get physical, but it's like an emotional enforcer more than a physical enforcer.
Yeah,
no one's getting clotheslined or getting elbowed in the face or too much. Haslam's hard foul is an awful, it's a vicious foul, but it wasn't dangerous.
Right.
But emotionally, that sent a message, right? And Perkins is doing that emotionally.
Yeah, and you made the point about Jackson earlier. It's like when he comes on the floor, there's this feeling that everything gets a little more hysterical or manic. And with the Spurs, that's not something you associate it with. And I really think that helped them in Game 1. People always call it energy, I guess. But it's this edge that some guys in the league play with. And Ethan, to your point, those guys usually tend to be the best profile subjects. Tony Allen, it's like these guys who come in and that anything could happen. And a lot of times it feels like they spark their team just with that threat of uncertainty, just like what Reggie Evans did with the Clippers.
I've got a theory about the Spurs, and that really kind of the story that no one's written, and I'm sure it'll come out when or maybe it's been written, I just didn't read it, but it'll come out when this run, whenever it ends, whenever Duncan retires, that the Spurs have been a very healthy organization to be a part of for a lot of people who had trouble elsewhere. That it's sort of corny, but there's genuine love on that team between Pop and Duncan, between Duncan and Manu and Parker. It's a very serious and important thing, and I think when we think about how boring they are, in a way, it's they're so connected that it's not even, you can't even get inside the relationships that they have.
Yeah, they're too functional, sort of, and that's why I think when you have the stars who set that tone, then you have other guys who come from other places and had problems, because you're right, a lot of them did. Gary Neal had his problems in college, and not just, people have had off-court problems, and then they go to the Spurs, and because the 3 stars set that kind of functional tone, everybody else kind of falls in line. I saw it with Jackson today. They start spewing the company line, and it's impossible for Steven Jackson to be boring, but it's kind of happened, which for me it feels sort of tragic. But yeah, that's the way that culture has been set up, and to me, it's not just Popovich. It's been set up by stars who are willing to toe that line. So there are never these confrontations. We never have these debates about who's the man or who's the closer. And look, it's from our point of view, you know, I don't know that they're that good for the league because they don't drive this kind of discourse and conversation. They're almost best appreciated from afar, just like a piece of art or something.
Yeah, well, one thing, no, please, go ahead,
no.
Ethan.
No, okay. I'm just so fixated on this idea of... oh, vocal delay. I'm so fixated in a staggering sort of way, I suppose, on the profile subjects. I was talking about, we were talking about the future subjects. I was just wondering who's the best that you've had. Like, who's the best profile subject that you've encountered and written about where you were just staggered by what happened?
Tyson Chandler's really good. Odom's really good. Anybody who's had sort of what I love about the NBA is that so many of these guys were famous when they were like 13 years old, right? So it sets up these weird lives where they have to, and they come from nothing, most of them. So they have to deal with, this sort of celebrity that they're completely not prepared for. They often don't have the family structure to help them with it. And so then they experience usually some downfall and then kind of get their life and their career back together. Whenever I see like a narrative like that and a guy who's reached a point in his life where he is prepared to talk about it, and a guy like Chandler, for instance, who can now look back on all of that stuff that happened to him when he was a kid with some kind of perspective, that to me is always a really rich and cool subject. And then you have guys who
and there's some sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, Beckley, go for it.
Well, I was going to say, I think there's some very, very introspective and thoughtful players in the league, and it's got to be really fun to be able to bring that to readers. One last question before we let you go.
But they don't play for the Spurs. They don't play for the Spurs, though.
That's a problem.
So that's why I'm in the wrong spot.
You have to admit, though, this postseason has been, and Kevin Arnovitz said this to me, has been sort of like an honorary ceremony for the Spurs and everything that they stand for. I think a lot of people, it's kind of sort of what Dirk went through last year, where everyone's kind of like, all right, we didn't say enough about you, and now we're all just going to elevate you and put you on our shoulders.
Elevate you, that's right. It's so much like Dirk. That's a great comparison. Right as you were saying it, I was thinking of Dirk, too. That's true, and it has become, and I think that the excuse now is that, well, you're playing faster, so now you're more fun to watch, so that's why we're going to all appreciate you. But really, it's just this natural sort of media arc that because they got beat down the last few years, now they've gone through their comeuppance, and now we can appreciate them. And the same thing will happen for LeBron when he, inevitably wins it, if not this year, maybe next.
Yep. All right. Well, I don't want you to scoop yourself, but before you go, can you leave us with an anecdote you like that you haven't shared yet from this series?
Oh man, I don't have it. Well, I've actually just got here.
What about the softball team then? How did they look?
No, I don't know. What I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to write about really what you're talking about, Beckley, about this sort of appreciation of the Spurs offense and the efficiency of the thing is they're not as good talking about it. But I do find interesting this, and Kevin mentioned it too, but this correlation between them and those Suns teams, who they never really allowed to be over the top. But from what we of them in those series and the Suns in those series, and using it, to maybe be the first really, will they be really the first team that plays with this kind of pace to win a title? Does that maybe the Showtime Lakers?
I guess you'd say since like the 80s,
like,
right? In the 80s, Showtime or whatever.
But everybody always said, well, the Suns can't win like this. The Suns can't win like this. And the team that may end up winning like that is the Spurs, oddly enough.
Yep, and a team that basically, you know, I think you could make an argument that the Spurs had all the pieces in place to play every bit as good a defense as the Spurs did. There's just, you know, that they didn't pay attention to that side of the ball with the sort of rigor that the Spurs do to take things away.
Yeah, that they weren't committed to it enough. That's interesting. Yeah, because I think the Spurs probably, when the defense comes first and that foundation is there first, it's probably then more fun and easier to add the offensive side. You know, whereas, you know, the offensive side, when it comes first, it's probably more, you know, more obvious to neglect the other.
Well, and there's also stories. Jalen Rose was just on NBA Today podcast, and he said that basically, like, before they went in to play the Spurs, they had an hour-and-a-half workout, didn't really talk about defense, just planned to outscore them, and Duncan went for 40 and 20, and they lost game one, which was a game he thought they should have won. And after that, you know, this was like, I think it's 2009 or 10, the year that they really, like, looked like they could make a big run. Yeah, so, I mean, I think there's some serious, like, they just didn't do the work.
Yeah, and the Spurs obviously back then showed that they had the underpinnings for this kind of offensive explosion. It's interesting to me that it's all, I mean, it feels like a 3-year work in progress.
Yes.
But when you look at the numbers, they've improved every year. But this year,
and improved
the
roster.
Charts, and it's so counterintuitive. It's so for people like me who are kind of naive, it's so counterintuitive because I just think they're old. They shouldn't be able to run like this. But then when you drill down into it, you see that really the age is what creates much pounding on Duncan, and you know, using these new guys did a pretty spectacular job of coaching. I mean, I know everybody. It's pretty incredible to think that way more and have that work.
Yeah, he's sort of a genius. Talking, of course, about Greg Popovich. Well, thanks a lot for joining us, Lee. I think we've sapped up enough of your time, but it's always awesome to have you on.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Lee.
Well, next time we'll be sure to devote more minutes to Ethan and Lee. I wanted you guys to talk about burritos, to talk about cervezas. I'm sorry we missed out on that opportunity.
Yeah, and how taquerias in San Diego are called taco shops counterintuitively. It's more anglicized for some reason, and you know, all that great stuff about French fries and burritos. That subject needed parsing. That's something that we needed to get into, and I apologize to everybody watching for not addressing it with the reverence and the attention to detail that it begged for. So I'm sorry, guys. That's mostly
Street
on
Food
me.
Speak
Don't blame
Live,
yourself.
coming
Beckley.
soon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Well,
actually, as always, it's important to blame James, our producer, who you cannot blame for that awful sound that came in. I think that was actually my fault. I tried to mute myself, but instead I unleashed a dimension, and these creatures were flying through the vortex, and that's what the sound they were making. So, Peep and James,
7 days.
I didn't mean to throw you under the bus. Great show as always. And thank you to our guests, and thank you to everyone who's watching. Enjoy the games tonight. We will see you next week, and we'll probably know our finals matchup then.